Okay, they're letting me go into another room while they check.
Okay, when you get a quiet place, then pop back on.
Okay, I'm here.
And I'll start now. Are we ready to start, Luca?
Yep.
Hello, this is John Florescu. I am this time in France, not in Bucharest, but welcome to another show. We have Alison Mutler, who's the former AP correspondent in Bucharest and elsewhere. She is a graduate of London University in 1987. She worked at UPI. She also worked at the Daily Telegraph, and she runs Universal Net. She's been covering
Somebody has
Romania
Facebook open, please.
for about 30 years. And so therefore, she's quite a well placed to participate in this conversation today. It's a particularly unusual conversation or unusual event in as much as this is the election that began last November 24th, 2024. That election saw the rise of Călin Georgescu, and there was a recount that was done that was ordered by the government. And in short order, the Constitutional Court of Romania decided to cancel the second round of the election, even though there was a great debate about it, in as much as he was accused, this is to say Călin Georgescu, of using social media, notably TikTok, and being helped and assisted by Russia, and some people say China as well, and top influences. The political class of Romania was accused of maneuvering to get rid of a candidate they'd prefer not to see. The Trump administration, to some extent, saw this as a miscarriage of justice, of democracy. J.D. Vance spoke out on it, Elon Musk spoke about it, and even Tucker Carlson came to Romania to interview Călin Georgescu, who's not on the ballot this time around. Jim, you remember that was quite a controversy at the time. You picked it up from Washington, right?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, the issue of Russian interference in Western elections is very much front of mind to folks in Washington, given what's happened in Western Europe, given what happened in Moldova, Poland, you go down the list. And I think the situation in Romania, in many ways, seems like the most extreme case.
Interestingly enough, I think Donald Trump Jr. is in Bucharest or is scheduled to come here any day. Are you back on with this, Alison?
Yeah, I'm here. He was actually here last night. He was in Bucharest, and some candidates, Victor Pont, who's running for president, met up with him actually in Sofia, trying to, get some PR and boost his own campaign ahead of the election, saying he wants to make Romania great again, and Romania should be part of this new Trump revolution, if you like. So definitely Victor Ponta met up with him, and his presence in Romania will help George Simeon. Because it is near elections, Trump Jr. didn't meet any government officials or anybody officially. It was a business meeting. And he's also been to Hungary. It's not just purely a Romania visit. It's a visit to the region, which is supposed to boost the Trump brand.
Now, Jim was just mentioning a moment ago how, a lot of eyes were on Romania, and some people thought Romania had abandoned the democracy. Other things seemed to say that Romania was saved. But how do you think this time around? Do you think they're going to get it right this time around? What would be your guess?
I would say Romania was damned if it did, damned if it didn't. So whatever it had decided to do with the elections, whether it decided to cancel them or to allow a candidate who had received illegitimate and illegal help and therefore would not have been a legitimate president, it couldn't win either way. Somebody said that Romania decided it could either lose a hand or lose its life. But it depends on how you see it. Obviously, cancelling elections is never a good look, and there has to be a very serious reason. Now, they have a lot of information has come out. Some people aren't convinced. There is also a certain amount of naivety in Romania that the country could ever be a target for Russian disinformation. I think some people are waking up now that a war isn't necessarily conventional. It's not fought with Patriot missiles and weapons and ammunition. There is actually such a thing as a hybrid war, which the Russians are particularly good at. And of course, Romania is in their sights. It's a NATO and EU member. it has a key geostrategic position on the Black Sea, Moldova, and Ukraine. And there are certain shared narratives, the Romanian Orthodox Church, socially conservative nations, a feeling that the West has mistreated its eastern neighbors like Romania. So it is fertile ground for Russian disinformation, tapping into certain narratives, feeding the idea that perhaps Romanians are victims or mistreated by the West.
Tell me, Alison, would you just explain how this election process works? Because some people may know how it doesn't work, don't understand it.
Basically, the president has a lot of power. He's elected by the Romanian people, the Romanian electorate. He is in charge of, or she, but there hasn't been a she so far. The president is in charge of defense, foreign policy, names intelligence chiefs, names chief prosecutors, and has a lot of informal power. He can send, or she can send back laws to parliament, which the former president Klaus Iohannis used to do quite often, and has a lot of room to maneuver politically. So if we did have a change of direction in Romania, even though on paper the new president can't change the prime minister, informally they probably could set in motion certain procedures to get a completely different prime minister that more aligned with, let's just say, nationalistic values, if a nationalist were to win the election.
And if the Simeon figure one, does he have the right to name Georgescu as prime minister?
On paper, as I said, no, but in reality, it could be worked out. He could, there could be defections, party defections from the Social Democrat Party. That is broadly the biggest party in Romania, and broadly speaking, a social democratic party, but socially conservative. And some of those are quite amenable to Simeon or Călin Georgescu. So some of them could either defect from the PSD, or they could vote in line with the OUR and other nationalistic parties.
I don't want to get too much into what is the past, although who knows, the past could be also the future. But in the case, people have sent me some emails asking, what's the strongest bit of evidence that you've seen? Because there's been tons of it against Călin Georgescu. Why was he thrown out? Could you please explain as simply as possible?
There was a massive interference on TikTok that was coordinated. It went into action, I think, on the 11th of November. I think it was 25,000 accounts, all kinds of bots, basically boosting his campaign, making him out to be very popular. These accounts had been prepared long in advance, some as early as 2016. Others were linked to, there was a piece in Bloomberg yesterday, others were linked to Turkey, but they had Russian IPs. So Romanians have been investigating it, not just in Romania, but also like Turkey is an ally because it's in NATO.
Right. And then, so you don't think that you expect the Trump administration to use its influence behind the scenes, or are we speculating too much?
There was a bipartisan visit of Democratic and Republican senators, I don't know, or congressmen, congresswomen, a couple of weeks ago, but they've been very tight-lipped. But it was basically to see what happened in the election, why it was cancelled, and all the background. They haven't spoken about it, as far as I know, but it was a bipartisan visit to go back to Washington to, you know, provide more information on what happened here in Romania. But as I said, they haven't spoken about it, but I suppose they have provided the information to various Congress committees and intelligence and etc.
I see. And how many people are voting, and how strong is the vote from the
diaspora? Hello?
Yeah, John, his computer just froze. He was asking how big the vote was and how much from the diaspora.
The diaspora could actually decide the election. The diaspora generally votes against the government, so they would vote for Simeon number one, 2/3 probably. And the other third would vote for a more progressive candidate like Nicu Jordan or Elena Lasconi, who probably won't make it into the second round. But less likely Simeonescu, who's the government candidate. But the diaspora has, in the last decade and a half, been incredibly important, and actually has decided the result of the presidential elections and parliamentary elections.
Sorry, I got lost. I lost it. If it happens again, Jim, you can we can double together. You're given a question to ask, but if you were to ask your own question, what question would you ask of these guys?
Well, first of all, I'm not given a question. We have to come with a question, and we submitted it in advance, and then it's going to be thrown into a bowl. They obviously don't want to duplicate questions, and the question is only to one candidate. So I wanted to ask George Simeon if he wins, and he is the favourite. He's the front runner, but he's also the favourite to win the runoff as well. Romania has helped Ukraine a lot with refugees fleeing the war, with the transport of grain, with Patriot missiles and intelligence sharing and other things, and would stand to earn potentially billions of euros, dollars from a reconstruction. How would he, the front runner in Romanian elections, if he was elected president, how would he handle that? How would he manage that? Because he is persona non grata in Ukraine, and he has spoken against Ukraine and Moldova as well. Romania. So how would he handle that? You know, Romania needs to tap into all this money that it deserves, and then you have a candidate who's actually banned in that country. So that might be quite difficult.
And you just hinted something that surprised me, that he's the front runner in the second round as well. Did I get that right?
He actually is. It is close. We don't know. We're not, because before we had a similar election between Iliescu and Corneliu Vadim Tudor. Romanians got scared and all voted for Iliescu, but we're living in a different time. And the candidates that might make it to the second round, like Crin Antonescu or Nicu Jordan, they're not necessarily that strong. So it's unclear whether there will be an if there is an anti-Simeon vote, and there will be an anti-Simeon vote, whether it will be strong enough to stop him. So I think he's still he's the favourite to win the race.
In what way is Simeon like Georgescu, and in what way are they different?
Good question, John. They both belong to this, what they call sovereigntist camp, which is sort of, you could call it nationalistic or isolationist, as you wish, which is make Romania strong. It's very hard how they're going to make Romania strong if they weaken relations with the EU and NATO, but that's what they're saying, and they're saying that we'll make Romania greater again. We'll have a bigger voice in the EU. We'll have a bigger voice in NATO. We'll decide our own fate. So they're both in that camp. But I would say for sure, Simeon is less of a conspiracy theorist than Călin Georgescu, and he is in parliament, so he's had parliamentary experience, whereas Georgescu hadn't had any parliamentary experience. The other thing that differentiates them is Simeon is 38 years old and Călin Georgescu was 64 years old. So if he was elected, he'd be the youngest president ever, I think. But you could also say Simeon is a bit of can be considered a thug. No, can I say here, please? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. That it's all the arrangements. I'd asked to stay here rather than go inside. So Simeon is a bit of a thug. He roughed up the former energy minister in parliament. He's a former soccer ultra. So he was on the galleries, sort of very loud, goading football players, So he has that sort of background as a football hooligan, but a football hooligan leader, not just a regular hooligan. Right. And he doesn't really have a career. He's ever since he left school, he traveled to Moldova and Ukraine. It's a bit unclear what he actually did there, but he got into some sort of civic activity trying to promote, a greater Romania. So in that way, he's a bit different, whereas Călin Georgescu was a little bit more intellectual.
And so in a certain sense, would you make the parallel that he's kind of like a Trump supporter, basic Trump supporter, nationalistic, suspicious of elites, not, highly educated in the sense that, didn't have the, is that the crowd he's appealing to? Yeah,
he's sort of appealing, as we would say in English, to the common man. Who've just had enough of Romanian politicians. They're latching on. They like this sort of populism that they see in the United States, that they see in other countries, and they want to be part of that new trend. I have to say, without Trump, without MAGA, without Meloni, without the AfD, without reform in the UK, Romania's nationalistic wing would not be as strong as it is. It's totally connected to all of the global trend.
So what this is, if you to be asked, what is this election about? It's a referendum on what, in your view?
It's a referendum on Romania's place in the world, whether it stays in the Western pro-Atlantic orbit in NATO and EU and remains a strong and reliable ally, as it did under the rather unpopular Klaus Johannes, or whether it chooses a different path and becomes a weaker link and joins forces with politicians like Viktor Orban and Robert Fico in Slovakia.
The other thing I think it shares with the United States is a lot of people were kind of keeping quiet about what they really felt. So a lot of people in different groups in the United States turned out voting for Trump. And I've been surprised myself when Călin Georgescu was a candidate that a lot of people who I didn't think would be supporters were supporters. Do you think that's the case here?
I think the horse has bolted. I mean, I think that might have been the case in November, although what the support for Călin Georgescu, he was polling very low figures, 1 or 2%. And then it suddenly, because of this concerted, orchestrated campaign, it started, I think, on November the 11th, so like 2 weeks before the elections. That's when it took off. And that's when he was flooding with social media, and people who were on TikTok were like, wow, this is a really important person. Forget what the opinion poll's saying. This is the person we want. So I don't think now that horse has bolted, I don't think we're going to have any surprises like we did before. I think, in fact, what happened to Călin Georgescu has helped George Simeon be the front runner. And I don't expect any surprises. I don't expect any of the other candidates who we haven't heard of to suddenly rocket to first place. That surprise happened before. And we are still living, we're still living the results of that. So the campaign, as it was, to illegally help Georgescu, is actually bearing dividends now.
I see. I mean, you have also, to his benefit, to George Simeon's benefit, is some criticism of the leaders on the other side. Dan Nicusio, who's, I think, widely seen as a successful mayor, is accused of being flat in terms of communication, that he can't communicate well. And Călin Georgescu, he was acting president, he was president of the Senate, but seems a little bit like yesterday's man. Is that fair? Is that true? Is that working to the right's favor?
Absolutely, John. We're not talking about two strong candidates. They're stronger than the others. Călin Antonescu obviously has the government machine behind him, and he has a lot of those advantages, and he is a good speaker. In fact, in my opinion, out of all the 11 people running, he's the best speaker. But he is, as you said, he's been out of political life for 11 years, and he is seen as a little bit of yesterday's man. People say, what was he doing in these 10 years? I think he was raising his daughter, he was doing other things, but that is definitely a point of criticism. And Nicusio Dan is not a charismatic speaker or a charismatic person.
Yeah. Jim, I'm sure you have a couple of questions that are percolating in your mind. I have plenty more, but anything you want to pop in now?
Well, two. One is, where does Victor Pont fit into the race?
Victor Pont wants to fit into the race where he can. He's run in some ways quite a good campaign. He is a slick operator, to quote someone. He was the former prime minister. He is also in this sort of MAGA camp, make Romania great again. But he's not seen as quite as nationalistic as George Simeon, because he was Romanian prime minister. I think it was 2012. 2014, and he was part of EU discussions. So he was a social democrat, and now he's become a conservative MAGA person, because he thinks this is the way that the world is going, and Romania should be part of it. Romania should be part of the MAGA trend, not part of the EU trend. So he's making the most of it. When Trump Jr. was here yesterday, he was in the region. On Saturday, he popped down to Sofia, that's the capital of Bulgaria, and he had a meeting, and his campaign really, got that message out. So he is running quite a slick campaign. He claims that he actually might make the runoff, and that's possible. There might be that surprise. You might have a runoff between Victor Ponta and George Simeon.
Interesting. Second question is, from the Romanian point of view, not from the American point of view or the Russian point of view, from the Romanian point of view, how are they seeing U.S. interest in the election? How are they seeing Russian interest in the election? or are they paying attention at all?
Actually, I was quite surprised, pleasantly, by the visit yesterday, because it did seem to be strictly limited to business, and he didn't meet any officials or government, government-appointed members. And so I think his visit by Trump's son could have been exploited much more in this race, and it hasn't been. America has said what it's had to say. Romania has pushed back to a certain extent. But it seems to me in the last few weeks, sort of America or the Trump administration has laid off a little bit. As for Russia, Russia has now indicated that Kalin Georgescu was their man. They said, I think it was Dmitry Peskov, that's Putin's spokesman, said the other day that, oh, the Romanians got rid of him because he likes Russia. So they've basically admitted he's their man. Whether he was a plant or whether his ideas coincided with theirs, I don't know. But so Russia has become a little bit more vocal. It said a couple of things a few months ago. They were very critical of his elimination from the race. They said because he was anti-European, etc., etc. So they have sort of claimed Kalin Georgescu. But a lot of the way the Russia works is underground, behind the scenes, covertly. It's through disinformation, social media. Certain narratives are pushed. They're very good at it, and they know what narratives to push.
Thank you. Alison, I don't know if you've noticed, but I've seen a slight rise in anti-American comments and feelings now on the 100th day of the Trump administration. And I suppose these days, how important is it to emphasize your close relationship with Washington or the White House, like in Jim's days and Ambassador Gittenstein's days? It was always a big, strong calling card. How much of a calling card is that now? Another good question.
I've noticed it myself. For example, when the American embassy puts out a statement, often it's quoting Rubio, so the state secretary. There's a lot of very rude comments, which I'm actually quite surprised at, sort of mocking. I mean, obviously the American embassy doesn't respond to that, but that would never have happened in the past. So there is definitely more, but I don't think it's anti-American sentiment as such. I think it's more anti-Trump's sentiment.
Well, you've seen it with the reaction to visa waiver. You've seen
anything. If you go onto the Facebook page of the U.S. Embassy in Bucharest and they post something, before everybody would have made polite comments, etc., etc. Now there is just so many rude comments. Anything they post, saying you don't allow free speech, or this, you're that, just very rude and very
unlike the past.
Absolutely unlike the past. This would have never happened.
Well, let me ask you.
I've noticed it myself, where people are asking me, because they know I'm an American, so they're asking me questions not on, let's say, historical subjects, but on the administration. And so, look, what's going on with you, America? How have you changed? What's up with you? That's sort of the tone I'm picking up. I want to ask you about the nature of voting in Romania, because to some extent, no one can draw any understanding with the ideological differences between the parties. You know, they seem like acronyms that no one can figure out. Can you say that the Romanian people actually know these candidates the way they said they knew Mircea Joana or something like that? Do they know these candidates, the Romanian people?
Actually, John, they do. I mean, George Simeon, everybody knows him, Crin Antonescu, Elena Lasconi. Yes, they do know that. The top 5 candidates, Pont, they all know. The other ones, less so. Yeah. But I think, this election basically has dragged on for so long. It's been going since November. And, like Simeon came 4th in the first round of the elections on November the 24th. Lasconi herself is running again. So those are very familiar faces. It's been a major upset what happened in Romania with the elections. And, it's reverberated, to the top levels of Washington. So Romania has been a big story. So this has been the story on social media, on the televisions, on the news outlets for the last 5 or 6 months.
I had a conversation with General Hormuz, who used to be in charge of intelligence over at NATO, and he said Romania has never been more worried. He met with the Joint Chiefs of Staff the week earlier than when I sat down with him. Never been more worried since World War II. Do you feel that? Do you see that? Is that in the back of the conversation anywhere?
Yes, it's a watershed moment. basically, Romania, it is a moment, an existential moment for Romania. Romania is choosing its future path. Will it remain, firmly in the pro-Atlantic camp, part of the NATO, part of the EU, committed to those institutions, or will it choose a more independent role and align with, outliers like Orban and Fico? So it's an actual existential moment, and we, let's not forget we have this war raging on Romania's border. Trump hasn't. I'm not surprised, but he hasn't managed to push through a peace deal yet. It's very, very complicated. Romania's relations with Ukraine are very, very complicated. Officially, they have given a lot of support, but the Russian disinformation and the narratives that have come out saying that the Ukrainians are bad, that they mistreat the ethnic Romanian population there, that there is land that used to be part of Romania. Those have been very unsettling, and they've been going on since 2022. So Ukraine is a very difficult topic for any politician. You can't just come out like you could in the UK and say, look, Russia invaded Ukraine. This is a brutal dictator, and this country is, under assault. You can't say that in Romania. They have to couch their words somewhat. And this is like a lot of there is, again, I would say it's part of the sort of narratives that are coming out. Oh, your sons will be sent to war tomorrow, which of course is nonsense. But it's a very febrile ground, and there's a lot of disinformation, fears. And it's a huge shame for Romania. That's why I would ask the question about the reconstruction of Ukraine, because Romania in some way should stand proud and could stand to make, a lot of money from future reconstruction. But because the government is too fearful to communicate what Romania has done, Romania could really lose out.
Does taking on board this idea that they kind of want it both ways, they don't want to be in part of one alliance, they don't want to be partners, obviously, of a Russian alliance or Russian sentiments. But who does Romania turn to in Europe? Who do they regard as a leader in Europe today, if anybody?
France. France, I would say, and perhaps for defense as well, the UK, but France is I would say, Romania's, this, John, France is Romania's natural ally. I mean, its top trading partner is Germany, but I would say France is always the country that the Romanians would turn to.
Jim, can I pull you back in here? You're always better having an ambassador than journalists here. I mean, talking about myself, not you.
No.
Well, to what extent and I want to distinguish here, to what extent in the nationalism discussion, to what extent is that anti-American, anti-NATO, or anti-EU?
If you actually look at the recent opinion polls, this sounds counterintuitive. Romanians are very pro-NATO, and they are pro-EU as well, strongly so. And they also pro-American. They are feeling in a very vulnerable position because you have Trump versus Europe at the moment, and Romania kind of feels caught in the middle because traditionally it wants to be integrated to Western Europe, but it has enjoyed this strong security partnership it has with the US for the last 25 years or so. So it's very hard to kind of reconcile the two, and there is a lot of, are you on one side or the other? And I think for the moment, the Romanian mainstream has chosen Europe because that's where they get the money, part of the political, the security. Whereas with Trump, they're kind of trying to negotiate a way, but it's a bit hard because I understand the Trump administration doesn't deal so much through the ordinary diplomatic channels. So people like Victor Pont, for example, went down to Mar-a-Lago, met people from the Trump administration or people close to Trump, and therefore scored political points and also got his side of the story out there first. Whereas it's a bit more difficult now for the Romanian ambassador, for the normal diplomatic channels that used to work under Biden and America before Trump.
Go ahead, Jim. You go ahead.
Well, I would just say, how is President Trump himself seen among Romanians?
Another good question. I think Romanians, first of all, number one, Romania is a pro-American. Okay, after Poland, Romania is the most pro-American country in the region, more so than Hungary, more so than Bulgaria, more so than Serbia, Czechia, etc. So they're very pro-American. So they've tended, whoever's the president, we like them because we like America first. We like America. Trump, some people really like him. They really like that because Romanians are socially conservative. They like the fact that he's a bit anti-LGBT, that he's anti-woke, that want families, etc., etc. They like that. They don't like, immigration's Romanians, although Romania doesn't have a lot of immigration. I think they would resonate with that idea that we don't want these illegal immigrants. So they like his socially conservative platform. But obviously, the more educated Romanians find it, some of the things he says beyond the pale, shall we say, and they find him a buffoon, and they also find him dangerous to the world order we live in. But the more educated ones.
Alison, you were saying a second ago that the Romanians are pro-NATO, they're pro-West, they're pro-American, and that's sort of in their heart even now. But then also you said earlier that they feel this sort of different position in society. I'm reminded a little bit about the Mircea Joana, who represented all those qualities and went from number one to way at the bottom of the list. What does Joana's fate in the vote tell you about where Romania's head is at today?
That's the point. Where is its head at today? And I don't think Romania, there is much of a head. If you mean by head reason and rational thinking, I think there is definitely a mood of let's burn the house down. Let's just burn the house down. Because on the one hand, Remain's a pro-NATO and pro-EU, but on the other hand, we have George Simeon is easily the front runner, the favourite to win the president, and he's a skeptic. So how are you going to reconcile those two? So there's a lot of it's like a bit like the Brexit. People, there's also a lot of confusion. People, are skeptical about the elections being cancelled. They don't understand why they were cancelled. They don't bother to look into why they were cancelled. They have no idea how a hybrid war actually works. They have no idea that their country could actually be a target. So there's a massive amount of naivety, even among quite educated people. I mean, up to mid-February, like, what are you talking about? How could Russia interfere? I almost find it sort of provincialism that they couldn't believe that they would be a target. They weren't almost interesting enough or important enough to be a target. So I think there's a lot of emotion. They want to burn the house down, and there's a lot of confusion. And there's not much. There are obviously some people think, this is actually a very important choice for Romania, what our future is going to be. But my feeling is I think the emotion is winning at the moment, and the emotion, like Brexit, because now a lot of people in the UK regret Brexit. But at the time it was like, let's seize back our power, our sovereignty. Let's kick the EU to the curb. I think there's some of that feeling in Romania as well.
I take it that we have a situation similar between the United States and Romania, in as much as the big cities in the United States, certainly the coastal cities, tend to support Democrats, whereas sort of Middle America and the South and different groups went for the people that wanted to burn the house down. Is that same phenomena prevail in Romania, where a lot of the Simeon voters are not big city people, but little guys around the country?
Actually, there's a lot of Simeon voters in Bucharest, because Bucharest, as you know yourself, is a real mixture of incredibly wealthy people. There are parts of Bucharest which they say are richer than Switzerland. But you also have people on quite small salaries and who haven't sort of profited, as you say, or benefited quite as much from Romania's economic progression and the fact that the country has opened up and developed and is getting all these EU funds. So I think Simeon actually has quite a few voters in Bucharest as well. But obviously a candidate like Nicu Jordan is more popular amongst, I think, the diaspora, and also among the sort of urban elite, not necessarily financially elite, but for example, students as well, more academic, more intellectual people. In the countryside, I would say Simeon would do quite well. Even Crin Antonescu, for sure. I think the Hungarians, who are very disciplined voters, will vote for him. He'll do very well in those Hungarian counties. Someone like Nicu Jordan seems so unconnected to the average Romanian. That is his weak point within Romania. He might do quite well with the diaspora if he gets into the runoff, but he'll have to really work to get those PSD voters out in the sticks.
Do you think Margaret Macmillan, who's a great expert in World War I, as you know, in an interview, she said that she thought that the question of Transylvania was not a closed book, to quote her exact words. She said, I don't think it's going to happen, but it's not a closed book. Do you think there's concern in Romania about Hungary and Transylvania? Could that possibly, in this very peculiar world, could that possibly pop up as an issue again?
John, absolutely. At Universal.ed, my editor, he's written a couple of editorials about this, because if Simeon wins and he forms an informal alliance with, as I said, Orban and Fico, for example, then, you know, this part of the Europe will become more unstable, less reliable. And there will be, we've already, you know, Simeon is known for, he wants to reunite Romania with its lost territories.
Yeah.
And if that happens, then Orban, we all know that, or you know, ideally the Hungarians would like to have Transylvania back. So we'll open all kinds of questions and all kinds of discussions. And because the world is so volatile at the moment, we don't know what's going to happen in Ukraine. When we're territories, borders are changing all the time. So I agree that definitely the Transylvania question is not concluded. It's not, even though it's been with Romania for over 100 years. And if you do have a nationalist winning the elections, this will make the prospect of borders much more uncertain.
You mentioned earlier that the French feel affinity to, the Romanians feel an affinity to France. Do the Romanians trust NATO if there's no USA in NATO, or less of a USA in NATO?
I think that Romanians will feel more insecure because America is the number one in NATO, and it's seen as the security provider. You have the Deveselo missile shield, you have the bases down Mihai Gogănicianu, you have one up in Câmpia Turzii in Transylvania. And obviously a NATO with either reduced or no America would be much, much weaker.
You have to take that. Is there a chance that if Simeon gets in, that he would ask for the United States to pull its NATO presence back or to trim it down?
Actually, I don't think so. Not at the moment. I don't think so. I don't think so at the moment. But we would be on new territory. We would be in a much more volatile, unpredictable. That's the best word. Unpredictable situation. So it would also depend what happens with Ukraine.
If the United States and Russia conclude an ugly peace, in Ukraine, is there a fear in Romania, you think, that a sphere of influence will somehow be permitted by Russia over Romania or some of the East European countries?
Absolutely. There is a fear that if Russia gets a very good deal out of a peace deal with Ukraine, it will flex its muscles and would have more influence over this region, particularly, including Romania, where it already does have influence, if not at a official political level, and an informal level, or at a ground roots level, and amongst the nationalist parties, there is a pro-Russian sentiment. So I think that for sure, if Russia gets a good deal out of Ukraine, definitely they'll have more influence in Romania, and we don't know what that would lead to.
Wouldn't that be an argument to support Simeon to some extent? You say, hey, listen, he doesn't have a big issue with Russia. He wants to play it sort of middle down the road. He's not going to stockpile American weapons there. In that way, you would think that might play in his favor.
Yeah, it could play in his favor, but I think there's also a question of how much can we trust him? Here is talking about people who don't support him. Would that not weaken our alliance with Europe? Would that not weaken our alliance within NATO? So, it could put Romania in a completely grey area, which I think Romania has never wanted to be in because of its geographic position next to the Black Sea, next to Ukraine, Moldova. Romania that's in a grey area where you're not quite sure what side it's on, could be a much, much weaker, vulnerable Romania.
Jim, do you want to pop in with something
Yeah, sure. Excuse me. You made the analogy to Brexit earlier, and you know more about Brexit than I do, but I certainly got the impression during Brexit that at least the people who put Brexit over the finish line felt that it was that they were sending Europe a message, but it was low risk. The Germans were not going to start bombing London. It was not like a conflict with the continent. It sounds to me like you're saying that that's sort of the situation in Romania, that folks can cast a vote that demonstrates independence, sovereignty, but we're still going to be protected by NATO, and we're still going to be integrated in the European Union, and so it's all going to be okay. Does that analogy make any sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. But on the other hand, if you have a nationalist or a sovereigntist winning the elections here in Romania, their position within NATO and the European Union will change from what we've had for the last 10 years. And not just that, George Simeon has already made, trying to make alliances with similar-minded far-right parties in Europe, like Maloney, for example, although Maloney is quite anti-Russian. But for sure, he would make waves towards Orban and towards Fico. And so there would be a certain amount of uncertainty and potential instability in this region.
Thank you.
Let me ask you a question. How are you doing for time? Are you okay?
I know that we are losing Alison right at the top of the hour, so I want to jump.
We'll let us. Alison, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Do you have any questions, Luca, back in HQ?
We do. Yeah, we do have a couple of questions from our online audience.
Okay.
Daniela Kamrat asks, how did the Romanian diaspora vote in the presidential elections last December? And how do you expect their voting behavior to change in light of the recent revelations about some of the candidates? And then Luca Laster asks, how can the Romanian diaspora stay informed and engaged with what's happening at home? Do you have any suggestions?
So the voters last time around in November, what kind of voters? I heard they were a Gold Party. What do you know, Alison, there?
Georgescu, and they'll vote probably Simeon this time, and they are Gold voters, and they have been since 2020. And the others who aren't in the Gold camp, perhaps the more educated Romanians, although that sounds a bit disparaging, I don't mean to be that way, but ones who are more engaged in civic society, shall we say, will generally vote for progressive candidates. So they'd be more likely to vote for a Lasconi, as they did in December, or Nicu Șordan. Probably this round they'll vote Nicu Șordan and Elena Lasconi, and less so the government candidate, Crin Antonescu. Pont, he will also pick up votes, I think, in the diaspora.
Mm-hmm. And the second question was, I guess, how could people expect to be more engaged overseas?
I think that they should perhaps avoid social media. Avoid social media and go to good websites. Hot News, G4 Media, TVR, Mediafax, Universal.net.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, Antenna even. And perhaps avoid tap into social media, but don't take it as your main source of information.
Watch your sources. Well, call Jim. He's a local call. Another question? We'll look at Jim.
Oh, let me ask you this one. Talking about the media in Romania, in other countries, including the United States, today the media is very polarized.
Yeah, and
so it's interesting that you say stick with the media, not with social media. The impression, the mainstream, the impression you're giving, which I just am asking the question, is the media that you just mentioned. It was a long list. It was probably 10 media outlets, and they're major ones. Are are they generally not aligned in the political race? Or are they mostly aligned?
The ones I've mentioned, I think they're not in the, they're not promoting Simeon. They're not promoting him. I think so maybe they aren't, they're definitely not, I think they try and keep an even tone and be a bit more equidistant. There are television stations like Romania TV, which does promote more nationalist candidates. But the ones I mentioned, well, they'll do investigative reporting as well. And they'll just tell the news as it is. This is the opinion poll. This is what this expert says. So they're a little bit more sober the way they report on events. But they're not trying to sort of change Romania's trajectory, because Romania did do an agreement in 1995 called the Snagov Agreement, where all the political parties of the day agreed that Romania's future lay on the pro-Atlantic path with NATO and the EU, and all the parties agreed with that. And it was it isn't enshrined in the constitution, but it has been taken on board ever since. That could change now, but that was decided in 1995. So that is a sort of given. That is a sort of status quo in Romania, and it has been until recently, and until these last elections.
Alison, to what extent, you were mentioning earlier that this campaign is about, breaking up the party, we just don't like it. And to what extent is that driven by the critique that the political establishment in Romania is a spent force? We've seen too much of them, and, it's time for them to move on.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
I said that you talked about there's a feeling of burn the house down. And also part of that, I guess, is that people are deeply suspicious or disappointed with the political class in Romania. Is that also a driving force?
Absolutely. We haven't mentioned that too much. We've talked more about Russian disinformation, but Russian disinformation, it has to tap into certain things. And there is a lot of dissatisfaction with the ruling class. With the PSD, the Social Democrats, and the Liberal Party, who they have basically, along with the Hungarians, ruled Romania these last 35 years. And so there is a feeling let's have something new, let's have something fresh, let's have something fun, populist, let's just burn the house down. And for sure, there is this, they blame for incompetence, for corruption, for all kinds of things, even though Romania has done phenomenally well in these last 35 years. It's come a huge distance from what it was in '89 to what it is now. And what's to say, if the nationalists do, they control 30% of parliament now, but if they manage to get a president, do we really think that corruption will reduce, will go down? I'm not convinced. Under the current government, you could easily criticize. There was no problem criticizing the government. There was no problem criticizing the president. You wouldn't get into trouble. You wouldn't be threatened. But the nationalists already began targeting journalists, saying, we know where your children go to school. We know when you leave the house. And we could see a new atmosphere of violence and threats against the media in Romania, which we haven't seen for very many years.
I know that Pro TV had some of its sound trucks and attacked, and they kind of backed down a little bit. So that's a very real thing that's already taken place.
It is taking place.
Other questions? We'll look at anything on your end coming over there.
No more, no new questions for now.
Jim?
Nope, I'm good.
Good. Well, I'd say that, I know you have a schedule and the things to do there, Alison, but that's a very interesting summary of things. And I think it's also very eye-opening because to the extent you say that the ground has shifted, I don't know if we who follow Romania, even at a slight distance, are fully aware of how far it's shifted. And I think that point was made well, and I do think this election will be quite revealing. So who knows? We might be in for a roller coaster ride.
Yeah, John, make no mistake. This is a watershed moment.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right.
I'm not doing a journalist exaggeration here. It really is.
Yeah, I think so. Well, listen, thank you, Alison, so much. Good luck tonight. I know you'll have a twister in there. Since you leaked it, I hope they're not going to get it out beforehand. But thanks so much, Jim. Thank you for co-hosting as well tonight. And See you on next show.
Okay, see you. Thanks for having